I was almost fooled for not understanding German until the cleaner's daughter saved me. Richard Thompson clenched the pen between his fingers as he stared intently at the documents on the table. That contract represented everything he had fought for over the past 5 years, the chance to expand his automotive parts business into the international market. Then he heard a bucket clatter to the floor behind him. Turning around, he saw a young brunette woman with curly hair tied into a ponytail, wearing a simple beige sweater, looking at him with an expression of pure terror. She had dropped the cleaning bucket upon hearing the German words spoken by investor Gerhard Schmidt. "Sorry, Mr. Richard," she said quickly, bending down to pick up the scattered supplies. Richard barely paid attention. His mind was fixed on the numbers Gerhard had just mentioned, a $2 million initial investment with potential for much more. The gray-haired man in a dark suit smiled as he gestured, explaining the partnership terms in his heavily accented English. "As I was saying, Mr. Thompson," Gerhard continued, "our company is very interested in your parts. The United States has a very promising market." The young woman who had introduced herself as Jessica, daughter of Mrs. Garcia from the cleaning staff, remained in the corner of the room, nervously organizing her supplies. Richard noticed she seemed tense, but assumed it was because she was in the presence of important executives. The official translator, Michael Wilson, a polished middle-aged man, confirmed each of Gerhard's words with confident gestures. "Mr. Gerhard is very optimistic about the numbers, Richard. It's truly a unique opportunity," Michael said, adjusting his glasses. For the next 2 hours, Richard listened in awe as they discussed European markets, international distribution, and profit margins that seemed too good to be true. Gerhard occasionally spoke in German to Michael, who promptly translated every technical detail. Jessica stayed nearby, seemingly focused on her tasks, but Richard noticed her casting worried glances his way. When Gerhard left with a firm handshake, scheduling another meeting for the following week, the young woman had already disappeared. Alone in his office that night, Richard reviewed the documents for the 10th time. His company, which had started in a garage 15 years ago, was finally getting its chance to compete globally. He called his wife, Karen. "Honey, I think we've made it," he said, barely containing his excitement. "The German deal is happening." "That's wonderful, Richard. You deserve this after all your hard work," Karen replied on the other end. But that same night, in the small apartment she shared with her mother in the working-class neighborhood of Queens, Jessica couldn't sleep. She knew exactly what she had heard Gerhard say in German during the meeting, and his words were nothing like what Michael had translated. Mrs. Garcia, a 62-year-old woman who had worked as a cleaner at Richard's company for over 20 years, noticed her daughter's restlessness. "What's wrong, sweetheart? You've been acting strange since you got home from work." Jessica looked at her mother, who was lying on the couch watching the prime time show. How could she explain that she had spent 5 years studying German in college, graduating with a degree in literature and languages specializing in Germanic studies, yet now worked as a cleaning assistant to help pay the bills? "It's nothing, Mum. I'm just tired." But it was much more than that. During the meeting, Jessica had understood every word Gerhard said to Michael in German. And what she heard was completely different from what had been translated to Richard. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, when Gerhard had said in German, "This American is more naive than we thought," Michael had translated it as, "Mr. Richard demonstrates great business vision." When the German remarked, "The clauses we prepared will drain this company dry," the interpreter had said that Gerhard was impressed with the growth potential. The worst of all was when Gerhard asked in German if Michael was sure Richard didn't understand the language, and the interpreter replied that he could rest easy. The American businessman was completely ignorant of foreign languages. Jessica spent the night researching Gerhard Schmidt's company online. What she discovered left her even more worried. GST Automotive, the German's company, had been involved in technology theft scandals in at least 3 different countries over the past 5 years. The next day, Jessica arrived early to work, hoping to catch Richard before he left for his external meetings. She knew her mother could lose her job if they found out she was meddling in matters that weren't her concern. but she couldn't stay silent watching Richard be deceived like that. "Mr. Richard," she called timidly when she saw him stepping out of the elevator. "Hi, Jessica, everything all right?" Richard seemed in a hurry, his phone pressed to his ear. "I needed to talk to you about yesterday's meeting." Richard hung up and looked at her curiously. "What about yesterday's meeting?" Jessica took a deep breath. It was now or never. "I understand German, Mr. Richard, and what that man said in the meeting wasn't what the interpreter told you." Richard stared at her as if she'd said something absurd. "What do you mean you understand German? Aren't you Mrs. Garcia's daughter from cleaning?" The question came out harsher than Richard intended, but Jessica didn't flinch. "Yes, sir, but I went to university. I graduated with a degree in literature and languages, specializing in German. I'm working here to help my mom with household expenses." Richard fell silent for a few seconds, processing the information. "And what exactly do you think you heard?" Jessica told him everything. Gerhard's actual words, Michael's false translations, her online findings about the German company. Richard listened with an increasingly serious expression. "This is a very serious accusation, Jessica. Are you sure about what you're saying?" "Yes, Mr. Richard. I can even write down exactly what he said in German if you'd like." Just then, Michael Wilson, the interpreter, arrived, as polished as ever in his grey suit. "Richard, how are you, my friend?" Michael said, patting the businessman on the back. "Ready to close the biggest deal of your life?" Jessica's stomach churned at the interpreter's fake smile. Richard looked from one to the other, clearly torn between his trust in Michael and the disturbing revelations he'd just heard. "Michael, I need to clarify something with you," Richard said slowly. "In yesterday's meeting, when Gerhard spoke in German about our company, what exactly did he say?" Michael laughed casually. "Oh, Richard, you know how it is. Technical comments, positive impressions about the American market. Why do you ask?" "It's just that Jessica here," Richard gestured to the young woman, "says she understands German and that what Gerhard said was different from what you translated." Michael's face changed completely. His smile vanished, replaced by an irritated expression. "Richard, for heaven's sake, are you really taking the fantasies of a—" He glanced at Jessica with disdain. "A cleaner, seriously? What's next? Should we ask the janitor for his opinion on engineering too?" Michael's words stung Jessica like a slap, but she stood her ground. "I can prove it to you," she said, pulling a paper from her bag. "I wrote down everything he said in German and the real translation." Michael let out a sarcastic laugh. "Richard, this is ridiculous. Are you going to risk the biggest deal of your life because of some girl who probably learned a handful of words from Google Translate?" Richard took the paper from Jessica's hands and read the notes. Even without understanding German, he could see the sentences were complex and technical, nothing someone would casually pick up online. "Michael," Richard said, his voice firm, "could you translate these sentences for me?" Michael took the paper, his eyes quickly scanning the lines. Jessica noticed him swallowing hard before answering. "Richard, this isn't very clear. German is a complex language with multiple possible interpretations for each sentence." "Then give me one interpretation," Richard insisted. Jessica decided to step in. "I can translate it myself, Mr. Richard, if you'd like." "No," Michael nearly shouted. "I mean, Richard, you can't trust someone without professional qualifications for something this important." "And what are your professional qualifications, Michael?" Richard asked suddenly. The question caught Michael off guard. "Well, I have market experience. I've worked in translation for years. But where did you study German?" Michael hesitated. "That's irrelevant right now, Richard. The point is, we have a meeting with Gerhard tomorrow, and you can't ruin everything over paranoia." Richard looked at Jessica, who held her notes firmly, then at Michael, who was sweating despite the air conditioning. "You know what, Michael? I think I'll reschedule the meeting. I need more time to review the contract." "Richard, are you crazy?" Michael lost his composure completely. "This opportunity won't come again. Gerhard will be offended if you cancel last minute." "Then let him be," Richard said firmly. "It's my company, and I decide when to sign contracts." Michael stormed out, shooting Jessica a hateful glare before leaving. When they were alone, Richard turned to the young woman. "Jessica, I'll be very honest with you. Part of me still finds this hard to believe, but something about Michael's behavior didn't sit right with me. Would you be willing to help me uncover the truth?" Jessica's eyes lit up. "Of course, Mr. Richard. I just don't want you to get hurt." "Good. But this stays between us, okay? And if we find out you were right, I'll have to find a way to repay you for your help." That afternoon, Richard cancelled all his appointments and locked himself in his office with Jessica to review every document in the German contract. The young woman translated line by line, explaining nuances of the language Richard had never imagined existed. "Look at this, Mr. Richard," Jessica said, pointing to a specific clause. "In English, it says the German company will invest $2 million in your factory, but the original German version says they'll acquire equipment worth $2 million, which is very different." A chill ran down Richard's spine. "How is that different?" "It means they won't give you the money. They'll buy machines and equipment, but those will still be their property. You'll basically be working for free, using borrowed equipment." As Jessica unraveled the contract's true contents, Richard felt his world crumbling. Every clause that seemed favorable in English turned out to be a trap in the original German version. "And here," Jessica continued, "where in English it says you'll maintain administrative autonomy, the German version mentions complete technical supervision. In other words, they'll control everything in your company." Richard ran his hand over his face, feeling like a complete fool. "How could I have been so stupid?" "You're not stupid," Jessica said gently. "You trusted someone who should have been professional. It's not your fault." That night, Richard couldn't eat dinner. Karen noticed something was wrong, but he only said he was reconsidering the terms of the German contract. He didn't want to worry his wife until he was sure of everything. Meanwhile, Jessica arrived home to find Mrs. Garcia very agitated. "Sweetheart, something strange happened at work today," her mother said, taking off her tired shoes after a full day of cleaning offices. "What happened, Mom?" "That well-dressed man, Michael, came looking for me. He said you were meddling in things that weren't your business and that I should talk to you." Jessica felt her blood run cold. "Did he say anything else?" "He said if you kept disrupting his meetings, we could both lose our jobs." "Honey, what have you been doing?" Jessica looked at her mother, the exhaustion in her eyes, her hands rough from cleaning products, her shoulders hunched after decades of carrying buckets and mops. Mrs. Garcia had sacrificed everything so her daughter could study, working 2 jobs for years to pay for Jessica's college. "Mom, I found out they're trying to deceive Mr. Richard. I can't just stay quiet and watch it happen." "But sweetheart, this isn't our fight. We need these jobs. What if they fire us? You still haven't found work in your field. We need our income." Jessica hugged her mother, feeling the weight of responsibility. She knew Mrs. Garcia was right. They couldn't afford to lose those jobs. But she also couldn't imagine Richard being destroyed by a scam she could prevent. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Jessica arrived at work determined to keep helping Richard, even at the risk of losing her job. But when she reached the floor where his office was, she noticed unusual activity. Gerhard Schmidt was there, along with Michael and 2 other men in suits she didn't recognize. They were speaking German in a meeting room, and Jessica's heart raced as she understood what they were saying. "The American is suspicious," Gerhard said. "Someone must have said something to him." "Don't worry," Michael replied in fluent German, confirming Jessica's suspicions about his true identity. "I know how to handle him. Richard is too proud to admit he might have made a mistake." "I hope you're right," Gerhard said. "Because if this deal falls through, you won't see a single cent of the commission we promised." Jessica realized Michael wasn't just a dishonest translator. He was a full accomplice, getting paid to deceive Richard. She decided she needed to record this conversation as proof. Pretending to clean the hallway, she left her phone recording near the meeting room. In 20 minutes, she had enough evidence to expose the whole scam. When Richard arrived around 10 in the morning, Gerhard and Michael greeted him with wide smiles. "Richard, my friend," Gerhard said in English, I hope you've thought carefully about our proposal. We can't wait much longer. Other American companies are interested too. Richard looked at the men, remembering Jessica's translations. Now he knew Gerhard spoke English much better than he pretended. Of course, Gerhard. But before we sign anything, I'd like to clarify a few points in the contract. Of course, Michael said quickly. But these are just formalities, Richard. The Germans are very detail-oriented with documentation. Richard opened the contract to a specific page Jessica had marked. For example, here where you mention the initial investment. Could you explain how this will work? Gerhard looked at Michael, who began to sweat. Well, as I explained, they'll invest $2 million in equipment to modernize your production, said Michael. I see, Richard said calmly. And will this equipment be registered under my company's name? Michael hesitated. Those are technical details we can settle later. Actually, Richard interrupted, according to the original contract in German, this equipment would remain the property of GST Automotive. Meaning you're not investing in my company. You're lending equipment in exchange for my free labor. The room fell completely silent. Gerhard glared at Michael with fury. How do you know this? Gerhard asked, forgetting entirely to pretend he didn't speak English well. Let's just say I got a second opinion on the translation, Richard replied. Michael stood abruptly. Richard, you're making a terrible mistake. You're throwing away the opportunity of a lifetime over paranoia. Paranoia? Richard also stood. Michael, I found out you're taking a commission from them to deceive me. That's not paranoia, it's fraud. Gerhard tried to regain control. Mr. Richard, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We can resolve this. The only misunderstanding was me trusting you, Richard said firmly. The deal is off. Michael lost all composure. You don't know what you're doing, Richard. We have connections, influence. We can ruin your company if we want. Now you've shown your true colors, Richard said. Get out of my office. Now. Gerhard whispered something in German to Michael, which Richard now knew meant something like, this isn't over. The two left the room with veiled threats. As soon as he was alone, Richard called Jessica. You saved my company, he said, tears in his eyes. If I'd signed that contract, I would have lost everything. I only did what was right, Mr. Richard. No, Jessica. You did much more than that. You risked your job to protect me. And about what your mother told me regarding Michael's threats, Jessica tensed. My mother spoke to you. Mrs. Garcia came to see me this morning. She was worried you'd lose your jobs because of me. But I want to make you an offer. Richard opened a drawer and pulled out some documents. I looked into your academic record. You graduated with honors in literature and languages, specialized in German and Spanish, and took several courses in international business. Why is someone with your qualifications working as a cleaning assistant? Jessica lowered her eyes. Because when I graduated 2 years ago, my mother got sick. She needed an expensive surgery, and I needed money fast. I sent out resumes, but companies wanted experience I didn't have. The only job I could get quickly was helping my mum with cleaning. And you never tried to return to your field? I tried, but it's hard to explain in an interview why you spent 2 years working outside your training. People assume you're not good enough. Richard shook his head. Jessica, I want to offer you the position of international consultant for my company. Starting salary of $6,000, plus commissions on closed deals. Would you accept? Jessica's eyes widened. Mr. Richard, are you serious? Completely. After what happened, I realized I need someone I can trust to help me with international business. And you've proven you're not just competent, you're honest. Jessica began to cry. But what about my mother? Will she keep working as a cleaner? About that, Richard smiled. Mrs. Garcia is 62 and has worked her whole life. How about she retires and takes care of the grandchildren you'll have someday? Mr. Richard, I don't even have a boyfriend. Jessica laughed through her tears. Oh, we'll figure that out later, Richard teased. The important thing is your mother doesn't have to work herself to the bone anymore. I'll give her a company pension. She deserves to rest. That afternoon, Jessica called all her college friends to share the news. After 2 years feeling like a failure, she was finally going to work in the field she loved. But the joy didn't last long. The next day, Richard received a threatening call from a law firm in New York. "Mr. Thompson," said a stern voice on the line, "we represent GST Automotive. Our client claims you violated a verbal agreement and damaged the company's reputation. They're demanding compensation of $500,000. Richard felt the ground slip from under him. "What verbal agreement? I never signed anything with them." "According to our clients, there was an exclusivity commitment during negotiations. Your unilateral cancellation caused significant losses." "That's ridiculous. They tried to trick me with fake translations." "Mr. Thompson, I advise you to get a lawyer. We'll be filing the lawsuit next week." Richard hung up, hands shaking. $500,000 was nearly everything he had in the company. If he lost this case, he'd go bankrupt. Jessica, organizing documents at a nearby desk, saw the despair on her boss's face. "What happened, Mr. Richard?" He told her about the call. Jessica was furious. "This is blackmail. They can't sue you for exposing their scam." "Yes, they can, Jessica. In the business world, whoever has more money for lawyers usually wins." Jessica spent the night awake, searching for a solution. The next day, she arrived at work with an idea. "Mr. Richard, remember when I recorded their conversation in German?" "I do." "Well, in that recording, they admit to running a scam. If we get it officially translated and submit it as evidence, they won't have a case." Richard exhaled in relief. "Jessica, you're brilliant. But we'd need a certified translation legally recognized." "I can do that. I'm registered as a certified translator with the court. It was one of the qualifications I got in college but never used." Over the next few days, Jessica worked day and night preparing the official translation. Every word was carefully documented, creating irrefutable proof of Gerhard and Michael's true intentions. When GST Automotive's lawyer received the translation, he called Richard that same day. "Mr. Thompson, our clients have decided to drop the lawsuit. Apparently, there were some misunderstandings during negotiations." Richard celebrated as if he'd won the lottery, but the victory brought an important realization. He'd been inches away from losing everything because of his own arrogance and prejudice. "Jessica," he said a few days later, "I owe you an apology." "Why, Mr. Richard?" "Because when you first tried to warn me, I barely listened. In my mind, someone who worked as a cleaner couldn't possibly know more than a professional translator. I was completely wrong." Jessica smiled. "The important thing is that in the end, you listened to me, Mr. Richard." "I did, but almost too late. And do you know why I changed my mind?" "Why?" "Because I remembered my own story. When I started this company 15 years ago, I was underestimated too. Bankers didn't want to lend me money because I was just a mechanic. Suppliers didn't trust me because I didn't have a college degree. I forgot where I came from. Everyone has their time, Mr. Richard." "That's true, and your time has come now." 3 months later, Jessica had completely transformed the company's international department. She established connections with honest suppliers in Germany, France, and Italy, tripling Richard's exports. The most impressive moment was when she discovered that one of the new German partners, Heinrich Bauer, had been scammed by the same duo, Gerhard and Michael, 2 years earlier. Heinrich lost nearly €1 million to them, Jessica told Richard during a meeting. But he said if we knew where they were now, he could help recover the money for other victims. "You mean they pulled this scam on other people?" "Absolutely. Heinrich gave me contacts for at least 5 business owners from different countries who fell for the same scheme." Richard grew thoughtful. "Jessica, do you think we should try to help these people?" "I think it would be the right thing to do. But I'm not sure if we have a legal obligation. Not a legal one, but maybe a moral one." In the following weeks, Jessica corresponded with Gerhard and Michael's victims across 4 countries. She discovered the pattern was always the same. Ambitious business owners lured by promises of international expansion, contracts with fake translations, and blackmail once the victims realized the scam. What shocked Jessica the most was learning that Michael wasn't American. His real name was Ernst Schmidt, Gerhard's brother, and he had lived in the United States for 10 years specifically to target business owners who didn't understand German. "Mr. Richard," Jessica said one afternoon, I have an idea. What if we created some kind of protection network? An association for business owners who've been scammed by international fraudsters to warn others about these schemes. Richard liked the idea. Like an alert system, you mean? Exactly. And we could offer reliable translation services for business owners who want to work internationally but don't speak other languages. Jessica's idea grew into a separate business, Global Integrity, a consultancy specializing in protecting American business owners from international scams. Within 6 months, they had over 100 clients. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Global Integrity's success brought Jessica recognition across the country. She was invited to speak at universities and business associations, always sharing her story as proof that competence can come from unexpected places. During one of these talks at Columbia University's School of Economics, Jessica met Jason Reynolds, a young international relations professor who was deeply impressed by her journey. "Your story is inspiring," Jason said after her lecture. "You turned adversity into an opportunity to help others." "I just did what felt right," Jessica replied modestly. "Could I invite you for coffee? I'd love to learn more about your work at Global Integrity." Jessica accepted, and that coffee turned into the first of many meetings. Jason was 3 years older than her, had lived in Germany during his doctorate, and shared the same passion for social justice that drove Jessica's work. Meanwhile, Mrs. Garcia was adjusting to retirement. At first, she felt useless without work, but soon discovered the joy of tending to her garden, baking cakes for the neighbors, and joining the church choir. "My dear," she said one afternoon while watering the plants in the backyard of their new home, "sometimes I can't believe how much our lives have changed." "The life of anyone who works honestly can always change for the better, Mom. They just need the right opportunity." "And you? Are you happy with that young man, Jason?" Jessica smiled. Jason had become much more than a co-worker. They had been dating for 6 months and he supported her in every project. "Yes, Mom, he's a good person. Just like you, my dear. Both of you want to help people." Jason had become a volunteer consultant for Global Integrity, helping to identify international scams through his academic contacts in Europe. He was also assisting Jessica in writing a book about her experience. "Your story needs to be told," he would say. "It could inspire others going through similar hardships." The book, From Mop to Boardroom, How I Saved a Company, while working as a cleaner, became a bestseller in the United States, leading to speaking engagements across the country and even invitations from international universities. During one of these trips, for a conference in Berlin, Jessica got a surprise. As she left the hotel for dinner, she bumped into a familiar face on the sidewalk. It was Gerhard Schmidt. He recognized her immediately and tried to pretend otherwise, but Jessica didn't let it slide. "Hello, Gerhard. How's business?" she said, in perfect German. Gerhard looked visibly uncomfortable. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. You and your brother Ernst tried to destroy my boss's company in the United States. Lucky for us, I understand German, right?" Gerhard glanced around nervously. "That was a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding was you thinking you could deceive honest people. But I have good news for you." "What news?" "Your photo is in Global Integrity's database, our consulting firm. Any businessman who researches your name before doing business will know exactly who you are." Gerhard paled. That's slander." "No, Gerhard. That's public information, all documented, with certified translations and recordings, all legal." Gerhard hurried away, but Jessica still called after him. "Oh, and if you try scamming anyone else, we'll know. We have an international network now." When Jessica returned to the United States, she told Richard about the encounter, and he laughed for 10 minutes straight. "Imagine his face when he saw you," Richard said. "He must have thought he was having a nightmare." The important thing is they now know they can't pull these scams without consequences. Global Integrity has already prevented at least 50 similar cases in 2 years. And to think it all started with you knocking over a mop bucket, Richard teased. Sometimes fate works in mysterious ways. 2 years later, Richard's company had become one of the largest automotive parts suppliers in North America. Global Integrity had offices in 5 countries and a team of 50 people. Jessica and Jason married in a simple ceremony, with Mrs. Garcia as the matron of honor and Richard as the best man. During his speech, Richard reflected on how it all began. 4 years ago, I was an arrogant businessman who nearly lost everything because I wouldn't listen to people I considered beneath me. Today, I know competence has no social class, honesty doesn't depend on a diploma, and wisdom can come from anywhere. Jessica cried through the entire speech. After the ceremony, she spoke privately with Richard. "Mr. Richard, I never properly thanked you for believing in me. Jessica, you're the one who saved me, remember? I should be the one thanking you. But you gave me an opportunity when no one else would. You saw my potential when even I had stopped believing in it." "You know what I learned from all this?" said Richard. "That prejudice is foolish. When we judge people by their appearance or profession, we miss out on incredible opportunities. And I learned that doing the right thing is sometimes risky, but always worth it." 5 years after the incident with Gerhard Schmidt, Jessica received a special invitation. The Department of Education wanted her to coordinate a national program to combat international scams. "It's a huge responsibility," said Jason as they reviewed the proposal. "You'd have to travel a lot, give speeches all across the country." "But it would also be a chance to help thousands of people," Jessica replied. "And Global Integrity is already stable. Richard can handle everything without any issues. The decision is yours, love. I'll support whatever you choose." Jessica accepted the invitation. Over the next 2 years, she traveled all over the United States, teaching business owners, students, and government employees how to spot international scams. Her program prevented estimated losses of over $100 million. During one of these talks in Boston, Jessica met a young woman who reminded her of her own story. Samantha Parker, 23 years old, had a degree in engineering, but worked as a receptionist at an export company because she couldn't find a job in her field. "Professor Jessica," Samantha said after the lecture, "my story is a lot like yours. I feel wasted in my current job, but I need the income." "Samantha, have you tried talking to your bosses about your qualifications?" "Yes, but they think a receptionist is just a receptionist. They don't see that I can contribute more." Jessica smiled, remembering herself a few years earlier. "You know what you should do? Start small. Offer help on specific projects. Show your knowledge gradually. Eventually, they'll see your worth. And if they don't, then you do what I did. Create your own opportunity." Samantha followed Jessica's advice. 6 months later, she called to say she had been promoted to the engineering department and was coordinating an export project to Canada. "It worked, Professor. I started by offering small solutions, and little by little they saw I knew what I was talking about. Now they respect me as an engineer." "I'm so happy for you, Samantha. And do you know why it worked?" "Why?" "Because you proved your value through work, not complaints. That's always the best way." Stories like Samantha's multiplied across the country. Jessica received hundreds of letters from people who had changed their lives after her talks, not just by avoiding scams, but by learning to value their own skills and seek opportunities. At home, Mrs. Garcia watched her daughter's success with pride and a touch of concern. "My dear, aren't you overdoing it with all this work? You travel too much, you're hardly ever home." "Mom, there are just so many people who need help." "But you need to live your life too. When are you going to give me grandchildren?" Jessica laughed. At 30, she and Jason had talked about children, but wanted to wait for a calmer time. "Patience, Mom. First, we'll finish these projects. Then, we'll think about expanding the family." "Your projects never end, Jessica. There's always someone else who needs help." Mrs. Garcia was right. The success of the national program had drawn international attention, and Jessica was receiving invitations to work as a consultant in other North American countries. "Honey," Jason said one evening, "you need to learn to say no. You can't save the whole world by yourself." "I know, Jason, but when I see people going through the same struggles I did, You want to help everyone, I understand that. It's one of the things I love most about you, but you also need to take care of your own life. The conversation made Jessica reflect. She had been so focused on helping others that she'd forgotten to build her own personal happiness. The following month, she made an important decision. She would only accept projects in the United States and dedicate more time to her personal life. To celebrate this decision, she and Jason planned a honeymoon trip they'd never taken. They went to Germany, ironically the country that had changed their lives. In Berlin, they visited museums, restaurants, and universities. Jessica took the opportunity to practice her German and experience the culture she'd studied for so long only in books. During a romantic dinner at a traditional restaurant, Jason asked a question Jessica didn't expect. "Jessica, do you regret anything in your journey?" She thought for a few seconds. "You know, Jason, I regret spending 2 years thinking I was a failure for working as a cleaner. Now I understand that period was essential for my growth. It taught me humility, made me value opportunities, and put me in the right place at the right time to help Richard." And what would you say to someone going through similar struggles today? I'd tell them that a tough phase isn't failure, it's preparation. Every experience, even those that seem useless, can become valuable in the future. The important thing is never to stop believing in your own potential. When they returned to the United States, Jessica was met with a surprise. Richard had created a professional education institute in her name, the Jessica Parker Institute for Human Development. "Richard, you shouldn't have done this," she said, moved. "Yes, I should. You didn't just change my life, you changed hundreds of lives. It's only right your name is remembered for that." The institute offered free courses in foreign languages, international business, and personal development for low-income individuals. The first class had 50 students, including Samantha Parker, who had moved from Boston to volunteer as an instructor. "Professor Jessica," Samantha said during the inaugural class, "when you inspired me 2 years ago, I never imagined I'd one day be here helping others the way you helped me. That's how it works, Samantha. Knowledge only has value when it's shared." 2 years later, the Institute had already graduated over 1,000 people. Many found better jobs, others started their own businesses. But what made Jessica proudest were the stories of personal transformation. Like old Pete, a 60-year-old doorman who learned English at the Institute and became a tour guide. Or Dorothy Williams, a housekeeper who discovered a talent for business and now manages a cleaning company with 20 employees. "You know the most beautiful thing about our work?" Jessica said to Jason one afternoon as they watched a graduation ceremony. "What?" "Seeing people realize they're capable of so much more than they imagined. It's like watching a seed grow into a tree." Jason smiled and took his wife's hand. "And you're the gardener, helping those seeds grow." That evening, Jessica had a special conversation with Mrs. Garcia. "Mom, I want to thank you for something." "What, my dear?" "For teaching me that honest work always has value, no matter what it is. If you hadn't set that example, I never would have had the courage to work as a cleaner when I needed to. And if I hadn't worked as a cleaner, I never would have met Richard, never uncovered the fraud, never changed my life." Mrs. Garcia cried, "My dear, I was always afraid you'd be ashamed of my work. Mom, I'm proud of you. You raised me all by yourself, worked double shifts to pay for my college, never complained about anything. You're my hero. And you're my pride, Jessica. Seeing what you've become is the greatest joy of my life." 3 months after this conversation, Jessica discovered she was pregnant. The news brought immense joy to the entire family, especially for Mrs. Garcia, who was over the moon at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. "Now you'll finally have to slow down," Jason teased. "Not a chance. I'm going to raise my child to be socially conscious from an early age." "Just like his mother," Jason said, kissing his wife's forehead. During the pregnancy, Jessica continued working, but at a more relaxed pace. She used this time to write her second book, Hidden Opportunities: How to Turn Adversity into Success. The book became even more popular than the first, translated into 5 languages, and selling over 200,000 copies in the United States. When Jessica and Jason's son was born, she chose a special name, Richard Garcia Parker Reynolds. Richard in honor of the boss who believed in her, and Garcia in honor of the mother who sacrificed everything for her. At the hospital, Richard showed up with a huge bouquet of flowers. "Jessica, I'm deeply honored by the tribute," he said, cradling the baby. "I promise to be the best godfather in the world for this boy. He'll have plenty of good role models to follow," Jessica said, looking at her husband, her mother, and Richard gathered around the crib. 5 years later, little Richard was already showing signs of inheriting his parents' intelligence and social awareness. He spoke English, Spanish, and a few words in German, and he loved accompanying his mother in the Institute's activities. "Mommy," he asked one afternoon, "why do you teach people?" "Because teaching is a way to give back the opportunities I had, my son." "And why do some people need opportunities?" Jessica smiled at the profound question from a 5-year-old. "Because sometimes life isn't fair to everyone. Some people are born with more advantages, others have to fight harder. Our job is to help balance that. When I grow up, will I help people like you? If you want to, my love. But what matters most is being a good person, no matter what profession you choose." By then, the Jessica Parker Institute had expanded to 5 states in the United States. Global integrity continued to grow, now with offices in 10 countries. And Richard had become one of the most respected businessmen in the automotive industry in North America. But for Jessica, the greatest success wasn't in the numbers or public recognition. It was in the small daily victories. Every person who discovered their potential, every crisis averted, every life transformed. During an interview for a national magazine, the reporter asked what the most important moment of her journey had been. "It was when I dropped that mop bucket," Jessica answered without hesitation. "How so?" "If I hadn't dropped the bucket, maybe I never would have caught Richard's attention. If I hadn't caught his attention, he would have signed that fraudulent contract. If he'd signed it, he would have lost the company. If he'd lost the company, I never would have had the chance to prove my potential." So you believe in fate. I believe opportunities appear all the time. The key is being prepared to recognize them and having the courage to seize them. And what advice would you give someone who feels stuck in a tough situation? First, never underestimate your own worth. Competence doesn't depend on job titles or salaries. Second, be observant. Sometimes the solution is right in front of us, but we don't see it. Third, have the courage to do what's right, even when it involves risks. Anything else? Yes. Remember that no job is beneath you. There's simply a lack of dignity in those who judge others by what they do. I learned just as much working as a cleaner as I did studying at university. Both experiences were essential in shaping who I am today. The interview went viral across the country and sparked thousands of comments on social media. Many people shared their own stories of overcoming adversity, creating a wave of inspiration that lasted for weeks. One story in particular caught Jessica's attention. It was about a young woman named Emily Johnson from Miami who had graduated with a degree in business administration but worked as a waitress to support her family. Emily had noticed irregularities with the restaurant's suppliers and, inspired by Jessica's story, decided to alert the owner. The result? The owner discovered he'd been robbed for months and promoted Emily to administrative manager. 6 months later, she opened her own restaurant and now employs 15 people. "Professor Jessica," Emily wrote in a letter, "your story taught me that competence knows no social class. I always thought that because I worked as a waitress, no one would take my ideas seriously. Now I know I was wrong." Letters like this arrived daily at the Institute. Jessica made sure to personally reply to each one, always encouraging people to believe in themselves. 10 years after the life-changing episode, Jessica was invited to give a lecture at the same university where she had graduated. The auditorium was packed with over 1,000 people. "When I sat in these same seats 12 years ago," she began, "I never imagined I'd return as a speaker. Back then, I thought my future was set. I'd graduate, land a job at a multinational company, and climb the corporate ladder the traditional way." The audience listened in complete silence. Life taught me there's no such thing as a traditional path. There's only the path each of us builds with our choices, actions, and courage. I built mine through cleaning, translation, consulting, and education. Every step was essential. "Professor," a student asked, "don't you feel frustrated for having wasted 2 years working outside your field?" Jessica smiled. "I didn't waste 2 years. I invested 2 years learning humility, observation, and empathy. Without those qualities, I never would have been able to help Richard, create global integrity, or found this institute. Those 2 years were the most valuable in my education. But didn't you feel angry about squandering your degree? A degree isn't wall decor, it's a tool, and tools only have value when they're used. I used my knowledge of German to save a company. I used my literature degree to create educational programs. I used everything I learned here at university, just differently than I'd imagined." After the lecture, a young woman approached Jessica. "Professor, I'm graduating this year with a degree in economics, but I've been job hunting for 6 months with no luck. I'm thinking of taking a job as a store clerk while I keep looking. My parents say it's a waste of time. What do you think? After hearing your story, I think it could be a chance to learn something new." "Perfect, but let me give you some advice. Be the best clerk you can be. Learn about customer service, inventory management, consumer behavior. All of it will be useful in your career as an economist." "How so?" "Economics is a human science. The more you understand about people's behavior, the better economist you'll be. And there's no better place to study human behavior than retail." 6 months later, the young woman called Jessica to say she'd been promoted to store supervisor and that her hands-on experience was now highly valued in job interviews for economist positions. "You were right, Professor. I'm learning more about real economics here in the store than I did in several semesters at college. Because now, you're seeing theory and practice. That's how complete learning works." Stories like these multiplied. The Jessica Parker Institute had become a national reference for human development, and its methodologies were being replicated in other countries across North America. One Friday afternoon, Jessica was in her office reviewing reports when Richard appeared with an unexpected proposal. "Jessica, I want to partner with you on a new company." "What kind of company?" "An international consulting firm specializing in business ethics. It would be like an expanded global integrity, but focused not just on preventing scams, but on promoting honest business practices." "Richard, I already have the Institute, Global Integrity, the government projects." "I know, but think about it. Imagine the impact we could have if we combined your experience in education with my network of business contacts. We could create a business ethics seal, a certification system for companies that want to prove they conduct honest business." The idea excited Jessica. Within 6 months, they launched Integrity First, a consulting firm that quickly became a benchmark in corporate responsibility. What set Integrity First apart was that it didn't just audit companies, it educated employees and executives on ethical practices. Jessica developed the educational programs, while Richard handled the business side. In 2 years, over 500 companies had received the Integrity First seal, sparking a national movement valuing honesty in business. During the launch of Jessica's third book, Ethics as a Competitive Advantage, a reporter asked a question that made her reflect deeply. "Professor Jessica, don't you think you're idealizing the business world too much? Does honesty always pay off?" Jessica thought for a few seconds before answering. "Look, I won't lie and say being honest is always easy or always advantageous in the short term. Sometimes, dishonest people gain temporary advantages, but in the long run, honesty builds trust, and trust is the most valuable asset in any relationship, personal or professional. But what if honesty puts someone at risk, like it did for you?" That's exactly the point. When I decided to warn Richard about the scam, I knew I might lose my job, but I also knew that if I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in an injustice. In the end, doing the right thing brought me positive consequences, but that wasn't guaranteed. "So you did the right thing knowing it might backfire?" "Exactly, and that's how life works. We can't control the consequences of our choices, but we can control whether our choices are ethical or not. I'd rather sleep peacefully knowing I did the right thing, regardless of the outcome." The interview went viral on social media, sparking debates about ethics, morality, and personal responsibility. Jessica received thousands of messages from people sharing ethical dilemmas they faced at work. One message stood out. It was from a young accountant who had discovered irregularities at his company and didn't know whether to report them. "Professor Jessica, if I report this, I might lose my job and hurt my family. But if I don't, I feel like I'm enabling something wrong. What would you do in my place?" Jessica replied carefully, "I can't make this decision for you, but I can share how I approach these situations. First, document everything before taking any action. Second, seek legal advice to understand your options. Third, consider whether there are ways to resolve the situation internally before resorting to an external report. Fourth, remember that you'll have to live with your decision for the rest of your life. Fifth, your family will be prouder of a father with integrity who faced hardships than of a comfortable father who turned a blind eye to wrongdoing." 3 months later, the young man wrote again, "Professor, I followed your advice. I documented everything, consulted a lawyer, tried to resolve it internally. When that didn't work, I filed the report. I lost my job as I expected, but the investigation proved I was right. Today, I work at a larger company with a better salary, and I sleep peacefully every night. Thank you for helping me find courage." Messages like this reminded Jessica daily why her work was important. It wasn't just about teaching languages or preventing scams. It was about helping people discover their own moral strength. When her son Richard turned 10, Jessica decided to involve him more in the Institute's activities. She wanted him to grow up understanding the importance of helping others. "Mom," Richard Jr. asked one afternoon, "why are some people bad?" It was a difficult question to answer for a child, but Jessica tried to be honest. "I don't think there are bad people, son. I think there are people who make poor choices. Sometimes out of ignorance, sometimes out of desperation, sometimes out of selfishness. And how do we get those people to make better choices? By educating them, my love. Showing them there are alternatives. Giving them opportunities to discover they can be better than they think. Is that what you do at the Institute?" "That's what I try to do." Richard Jr. accompanied his mother to one of the Institute's classes that week. He was impressed to see adults of all ages studying diligently. "Mom, that lady over there must be as old as Grandma Garcia. Why is she studying?" "Because it's never too late to learn, son. Mrs. Doris there is learning Spanish so she can help her grandchildren with their homework. And that gray-haired gentleman, old Pete, is learning computer skills to get a better job. He was laid off at 55 and realized he needed to update his skills to re-enter the workforce." Richard Jr. grew thoughtful. "It must be hard to study when you're already an adult." "It is harder, yes, but do you know what's even harder? Giving up on your dreams. These people here decided it's never too late to start over." That night, Richard Jr. told his mother, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to work at the Institute too." "You can work wherever you want, my son. What's important is that you choose work that makes you proud of yourself." "Like you're proud of your work?" "Exactly." 15 years after the episode that changed her life, Jessica was invited to give a speech at the UN headquarters in New York about business ethics and social development. It was the highest recognition of the work she had built over the years. In the audience were representatives from over 100 countries. "When I was 26, she began, I thought my life had failed. I was a young literature and languages graduate working as a cleaning assistant. Today, I understand that wasn't my failure. It was my preparation." The audience listened in respectful silence. "My experience taught me there are no worthless people. There are people without opportunities. There are no undignified jobs. There are societies that don't know how to value human potential. There are no impossible dreams. There are paths that need to be built with patience and persistence." During her 45-minute speech, Jessica told her full story, from the mop bucket that fell to the founding of the Institute that had already transformed the lives of over 10,000 people. "My story isn't special because it worked out," she concluded. "My story is special because it shows that anyone, in any situation, can choose to make a difference. The point isn't having perfect opportunities. The point is recognizing and making the most of the imperfect opportunities life gives us." At the end of the lecture, a delegate from South Africa approached Jessica. "Professor, your story moved me deeply. I'd like to invite you to implement a similar program in my country. We have many unemployed graduates and many business owners who need ethical guidance." Jessica smiled. "It would be an honor to help. But I have one condition. The program must be run by local people. I can train and advise, but the operation must be yours. Social sustainability only happens when the community takes ownership of the project." In the following months, Jessica received similar invitations from 15 other countries. In each case, she maintained the same stance: transfer knowledge, not create dependency. "My role isn't to solve everyone's problems," she explained to Jason. "My role is to teach people how to solve their own." 2 years later, there were institutes inspired by Jessica's model operating in 20 countries. All upheld the same principles: free education, human development, and ethics as the foundation of everything. One Sunday afternoon, Jessica was in the backyard playing with Richard Jr., now 15, when Mrs. Garcia, at 78, approached with a nostalgic smile. "My dear, do you remember when you were little and said you wanted to change the world?" "I do, Mom. You always said I dreamed too big." "Well, today I see you didn't dream too big. You dreamed just right, maybe even too small." "What do you mean, Mom?" "You didn't just change the world. You taught the world how to change itself." Jessica hugged her mother, remembering everything they had been through together, from poverty to stability, from prejudice to recognition, from despair to fulfillment. "You know what I've learned, Mom? It doesn't matter where we start. What matters is the direction we take and how consistently we walk that path." "And what direction is that, my dear?" "The direction of honesty, hard work, education, and solidarity. If we keep that as our compass, it's impossible to get lost." Richard Jr., who had been listening, asked a question that surprised both women. "Mom, what would you say to the 26-year-old Jessica who was cleaning offices and thought her life had failed?" Jessica thought for a long moment. "I'd say, Jessica, you're not cleaning offices. You're preparing to clean away prejudices. You're not wasting your degree. You're gathering experiences that will shape your true qualifications. You didn't fail. You're exactly where you need to be to become who you're meant to be. Hold on tight, because the best is yet to come." "And what would you say to people going through the same situation you did?" "I'd say competence has no social class. Honesty doesn't need a diploma. And opportunities don't just come to those who wait. Sometimes we have to create our own opportunities, and most importantly, never let anyone tell you you're not capable. You're more capable than you think." That night, Jessica opened her laptop and began writing her 4th book. This time, it wouldn't be about her own story, but about the hundreds of people she had met along her journey. The book would be called Anonymous Heroes: How Ordinary People Make Extraordinary Differences, and would tell true stories of transformation, perseverance, and moral courage. Because Jessica had learned her story wasn't unique, she was just one among millions of stories of people who every day choose to do the right thing even when it isn't easy. And these people, she discovered, are everywhere: in cleaning, at the front desk, in the kitchen, behind the counter, at reception. They are people society often overlooks, yet they move the world with small acts of decency, competence, and courage. The mop Jessica dropped 15 years ago had turned into an avalanche of positive changes that would continue spreading for generations. And it all began with a young woman who had the courage to speak German when no one expected her to. End of story. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, what did you think of Jessica's journey? Share in the comments if you've ever been in a similar situation or know someone who turned adversity into opportunity. Leave a like if the story inspired you, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales.